My name is Stephen Riddick. I am our VP of Sales and Marketing. I will be the tour guide for the day. I've been at CSP for about a little over 5 years now. Started my career with Cisco Systems, so obviously a tech bellwether. Learned a lot about security there. Went back, got my MBA, and then jumped on board at CSP and have thoroughly enjoyed the experience. So, I do think the one thing I would point out, while I do pride myself on being relatively technical for a business person, again, I am sales and marketing. My background was history and economics undergrad and then an MBA. So I will not be getting super technical today, really keeping it at more of a business level. I will try my best to answer any technical questions that may arise, but please know there may be some, if you get too deep in the weeds, I'll be taking back to our engineers and coming back with you afterwards. So as discussed, a very brief agenda today. First, what happened? Next, how did CSP respond? Just for our customers who are on, because we have gotten a lot of questions about that. So if you're not a CSP customer, we would love to have you on board. Sorry, that's going to be a pretty short part of the presentation today, but we've gotten a lot of questions from our customers about what we did, so did want to address that. And finally, how to protect your business from future attacks. So without further ado, we will dive on in. First, what happened? WannaCry looking back. And before we even talk about WannaCry specifically, wanted to spend just a moment speaking to ransomware in a whole. What is ransomware? So candidly, in the most simple definition is your machine is taken hostage for a ransom. Hackers come in, they encrypt everything, they lock everything. They are the only people with the encryption key. So you cannot get into your or you can get into your PC, but you will not be able to unlock any files on your PCs, or if they hit your server, whomever's connecting that server, all those files will be encrypted, so you will not be able to get any of them. And then they typically come and ask for a ransom, typically paid via Bitcoin to a offshore site where that's not tracked, to be able to give you the key to unlock your data. A few things, just ransomware in numbers that I think are really just eye-opening, and these are 2016 numbers, so just an FYI, but 41% of ransomware attacks were in the SMB space. So I do think it's important to realize that this isn't just, these attacks aren't just targeted at these very large multinationals. The ones you hear in the news, whether it's Sony, even after WannaCry, you heard about the Russian railroad systems or the English health system and things like that. You hear the big ones, the big enterprise, but just know that hacking and illicit activity on the web is not limited to enterprises. SMBs are just as vulnerable and just as big of targets. 200 million, that was the amount that the FBI tracked in the US of people who paid ransoms in 2016. So you may think, if you think for the entire country, not a huge number, but I think that next number is the even bigger one, 75 billion. That is the business impact in terms of downtime caused by WannaCry. So actually the FBI, the DOJ, everybody recommends do not pay the ransoms unless you absolutely have to. So that's why I think you see such a big discrepancy in those numbers. We never recommend our customers to. To us, backup is the best protection against this. Restore back your latest good backups. That's why there is only 200 million paid, but still, even if you don't pay, typically there is a major impact on your business in regard to downtime. And that's where that number really comes in, and the impact of ransomware is really seen. Also, this is just one diagram depiction that shows the growth of ransomware. I know this is a little small, but you can see it goes back to 2010, then on the left axis. 2011, there was one ransomware strand. And you can just see that growing over the over the years, how many more and more strands, even by month, of different ransomware attacks are coming out. This has become one of the most prevalent forms of hacking on the web right now, one of the most popular, and multiple strands just keep getting released. So it is a booming business for hackers. They're doing it because it is causing a lot of destruction out there. So this is a very, very brief video. It's only about a minute long, but I thought it was a great depiction of the ransomware infection heat map. So we're going to start here, and then we'll dive in with some more details. And there is some audio. Unfortunately, I don't believe audio is playing over the WebEx or the Zoom meeting, but it is just some background noise. So some, I guess, very dramatic, drum beats talking about how big this was. So if you look in the bottom left, that shows where we are in the timeline. So you can see once it hit, this is all still that day one now, how fast it spread really worldwide. The majority of the impact was in Europe, as I'm sure you probably know. India also, I think, was the second biggest hit area, and then spread amongst the Far East and the U.S. as well. But I thought that was just a very interesting depiction of how fast things spread and where it hit. And then this just speaks to some of the companies affected. Okay, so what happened? It's for anybody who's intrigued by politics, yes, I will leave it at that, by international cybersecurity, by geopolitical issues. This is a very interesting case in point. The NSA actually is the organization that found these vulnerabilities in Microsoft and created what they term some cyber weapons. And the NSA keeps things like this in their back pocket for whatever reasons they deem to have. I think where Microsoft has been extremely frustrated, though, is that the NSA never told Microsoft about these vulnerabilities. So the NSA discovered them, they created some weapons for them, had them in their back pocket, because Microsoft is always finding holes, always finding improvements, performances, security vulnerabilities. And as most of you know, they release patches continuously for all their operating systems. And a patch is just like what it sounds. It is a patch that closes a door that was accidentally left open, or a hole in the window, if you will. So they're always patching. The NSA had this, didn't notify Microsoft. You know, trying to boil this down, this is a very, very Cliff Notes version, but in 6 simple steps. NSA discovered the Microsoft vulnerability, kept it as cyber weapons. Eternal Blue and Double Pulsar were these two, what they term weapons. Unfortunately, there was a big leak. Everybody who watches any news today knows that leaks are everywhere. WikiLeaks, more on the internet side, won't even go into what's happening in Washington or in the political sphere in Washington, but these cyber weapons were leaked. Hackers then took these cyber weapons that were developed by the NSA, found a hole. Without getting too technical, there is a port and a protocol within Microsoft called SMB. It's a file sharing mechanism called server message block that uses port 445 to share files. It's a very normal, useful thing that is used. But unfortunately, there was found to be an exploit that could be, or a vulnerability that could be exploited here. So once that was identified, people were able to scan for this port. If they found that port, they were able to gain entry, encrypt, and then spread from there. One very important thing is that the large majority of ransomware attacks, and honestly almost all all security hacks, latest stats, depending on who you look at, but all north of 80%, one I saw was 81%, is more based upon social engineering. And that means convincing a user to click on a link, convincing a user to open an attachment, convincing a user to enter some information, whatever that is, social engineering. This one actually was not at all. This is what is termed a classic buffer overflow attack, where the hackers just went out, scanned every machine they could find, looked for machines that had this vulnerability that did not have it patched. They gained entry, they encrypted, and then it spread from there. So it actually was not a social engineering attack, which is very, very rare and very different than a lot of ransomware attacks. Honestly, as some of you may have seen, a security analyst in the UK did identify a kill switch in the code, and was able to implement that kill switch, and honestly prevented the spread from being much worse than it could have been. This all started on a Friday afternoon. Microsoft re-released patches for all operating systems. Over the weekend, a lot of people started patching and limited the damage the best as possible. One important thing, because I have gotten a lot of questions about this in regard to Microsoft and the patch. Microsoft had actually found, despite what I said, they knew of this vulnerability, but just not the severity and not to what extent it had. So they actually had released this patch in March, but it was not released as a critical patch at that point. And for a lot of people, if you're technical, you know that Microsoft has multiple levels of patches. A lot of people just apply the critical patches. You don't want to necessarily apply every single patch possible, because patches can break good things as well. So a lot of people just patch their critical, or just update Microsoft's critical alerts, critical patches. So this had initially been released in March. They ended up re-releasing it as a critical patch immediately. And to show the extent of this, they even went back to Microsoft XP, which is a former desktop operating system, Microsoft Server 2003, two operating systems that have been moonlighted, taken out of support multiple years ago, and they actually went back and re-released a patch the first time since these went into support, just to try to limit the vulnerability of the outbreak. And they even released a second patch here within the past week or two, just for even more vulnerabilities there. So very interesting to see all that went on in the background. I know that was a lot of information. I hope that did not get too technical, but I've personally found it to be very interesting to see what happened and how that spread. So finally, who was affected? This is another interesting thing, as people done more quote unquote post-mortem, if you will. Initially, right in the heat of the battle, there was a lot of early reports that thought this was all based upon unsupported Windows XP and Windows 2003 devices. That actually was incorrect. The vulnerability, this exploit, actually did not work as well in those operating systems. Of two that I think that the exploit was the biggest were both Windows 7 and Server 2008. But it is important to note, really, these machines that were not patched. So people who were patching in general seem to be doing much better than people who were not patching their devices. Finally, it was only a Microsoft issue. Anybody who was on a Linux OS, Apple, a Mac OS was not affected by this. So ultimately, the final damage, this hit 150 countries, 200,000 computers, $90,000 in ransom was paid. And but I think the biggest thing is just the uncountable disruption. Going back to that very first number that we started with, talking about the impact from a downtime, business impact and downtime, and there were multiple companies who were out of business for days because of this. So that is the real disruption. And this was, when all the dust settled, the largest ransomware attack in the history of the world when it comes to ransomware. So it definitely was a big one. And I think the scary part is every expert who you read is fairly confident there will be more to come. So not to be too scary, but that is, that's the reality of what's out there. So I do think it's important to be vigilant and protect yourself. So again, as I said from the start, we did at CSP get a lot of questions on how we responded. And for those of you who aren't our customers, I apologize. Just a quick 1 or 2 minute aside. If you are, though, just so you can be fully in the loop on what we did. So this started coming out Friday afternoon. I think you first started seeing some early reports soon after lunch, the 2-3 o'clock time frame. Honestly, though, I don't think people really started to understand the scope really until everybody on the East Coast was heading home about 4, 5, 6 o'clock, when I think the scope of the outbreak started to become known. So I'd say through Friday evening, we really monitored events, but really try to just understand what is going on, where are the vulnerabilities, where do we need to respond, how do we need to respond. So Saturday was an all hands on deck day, had multiple people involved, really doing some analysis, communicating with our customers, but also planning for overnight emergency patching. So Microsoft released all their patches. We went into all of our customers' environments and did emergency patching on that Saturday night, and then Sunday continue the patching and remediation. So fortunately, knock on every piece of wood, nobody was affected. I'm proud of our response, but again, also it didn't hit the U.S. quite as bad as it did in Europe either. But I think we were definitely very proactive in trying to get out and make sure that we did do what we needed to do to make sure our customers were protected. So moving forward, I think where I really do want to wrap up the last amount of our time is talking about what you need to be doing to make sure you are securing your business. And I really give the home security analogy the most. I mean, it has to be a multifaceted approach. And when you think about your home, I mean, things evolve and things grow, and it can't simply be a single point of entry. You can't just lock your front door, yet leave all your windows, leave your back door unlocked wide open. In general, if you imagine the firewall, yes, your firewall is a great front door or great lock. It's a mag lock on your front door. But then what are you doing elsewhere? In your home, you're also locking your windows. You're also putting in alarm systems. You're putting in video monitoring systems. You're putting in glass break monitors. You may be doing more things with physical security. Whatever it is, it's a multifaceted approach, and that's really how IT security needs to be as well. So with that said, I think from my standpoint, and we're going to spend the rest of the time on this slide, there really are tiers of security, and depending on your size, I think I'm going to actually even start with that last bullet. There are even more. What I'm really talking here is a lot of our customer sets and more of that SMB space. What's reasonable, what's understandable, but there always is going to be more. You look, heck, the NSA, they had a leak, not a hack, but even these largest organizations who are investing millions in IT security are getting hacked. So I think you just need to make sure you're being as vigilant as possible, as fair and reasonable as possible. So when we look at the tiers of security, though, I think it starts with some basic. First, routine patching. That is such a no-brainer. I think if you look at this WannaCry, just patching your devices would have secured you from that. The intent of this is not to make this a CSP sales pitch, but I will say that's something that comes with all of our managed services contracts. And I think it's something, candidly, it's so simple and easy that we don't talk enough about with our customers. It just sort of happens in the background, but I think WannaCry proved just how important it is. And team, I will give one alert. I'm sorry, there is a huge apartment complex going in across the street, and we just lost power. Fortunately, I believe we have UPSs, and everything appears to still be up. But I'm going to keep going. I apologize if something happens and you do lose me, but we have lost power here. But the show must go on. So yes, routine patching, whether it's with CSP, whether it's yourself, someone else, make sure you're patching your device. Antivirus, I won't say anything more. I think everybody is aware of AV. So I'm sorry, I did just hear that I am coming in and out here. I am going to keep going. I do apologize if we do lose you, but yep, the lights are out. So sorry about that. A basic firewall is important as well as email security. That is not only a spam filter. I think too many people look at email security just consider, oh, I have a spam filter out there. Really, at CSP, the baseline that we recommend from an email security platform, we recommend a group called Proofpoint, but there are many out there, but is to not only make this a spam filter, but actually look at the emails that are coming in, do AV antivirus scans on the emails, but more importantly, do click protection. So embedded links in emails. If your user clicks on a link in an email, that link is being scanned. That is a #1 phishing attack, social engineering, as we talked about, where people mask what an email looks like. You think you're clicking on a link to go to your bank, you're really clicking on a link that's going to Romania and some hackers, as well as PDF scanning. So some email security, very important, as well as risk assessments. Periodically have somebody come in, scan your environment, see what vulnerabilities are found, and see what you can do. So I think at a basic level, that is the most important. We then take a next step up to the intermediate level. And a few of these things that I have bolded in with stars are some new additions to the CSP portfolio. So I'm going to be speaking on those a little bit more. But one, just starting with the next generation firewall. Even if you have a firewall, and it's still working and still running fine, it might even still be under support. I'll admit, I worked at Cisco. I love Cisco. It's a great company. Their ASA 5505. Those are still out there. They're still running. The beauty of Cisco, you can put a box in it can run for 10 years. In this case, though, just because it's out there and running, there actually are new technologies that can better protect you. So I would recommend making a move to what's termed a next generation firewall. There's some just advancements, more protections for you. The next I would like to discuss, OpenDNS. DNS is a domain name server services. So that's really what combines when you type in google.com, the back end of the internet is all ones and zeros or IP addresses. You might recognize a 192.168.10.10. So OpenDNS is also a Cisco product that Cisco is so large, they have routers, switches, network devices across the world. So they see all this internet traffic and they know where things are pointed. So even if somebody clicks on or types in a link that they think is a legit link, it scans, OpenDNS scans where this is going and makes sure that it's actually not a redirect for a bad site on the dark web somewhere where it shouldn't be. So it's scanning every link going out. The next thing that CSP has just added is some user security training. As I said earlier, one of the greatest vulnerabilities that I don't think a lot of companies do as well addressing is their end user training. They talk about it, they tell people to be careful, yet that's about the extent of it. Also, as I stated from the start, 81%, give or take some percentage points depending on the survey you find, of all security hacks are social engineering based upon end users. So with our end user training, we now have a 1.5 hour webinar. We have a test that you can force all your employees to pass if you would like. It also includes a weekly, what's termed a micro training, where an email goes out. It's under 1 minute video clip of just the sort of a big security hack that they're seeing that week when it comes to phishing, when it comes to maybe saying, hey, here's a Google email that we're seeing going around a lot right now. Watch out for this. It includes a monthly newsletter. It also includes fake phishing attacks. So we can simulate a phishing attack, send out your organization, see who clicks, see who doesn't. So then we can go in and you can help us train those individuals of, hey, this is what to look out for. Content filtering, a little similar to OpenDNS, just in that you can block where people are going, as well as intrusion prevention. And that's really what's termed deep packet inspection. I won't get too detailed. Both of those can be included in a next generation firewall, but some good solutions to have. Knowing I'm a little short on time, I will wrap up with the advanced. From an advanced standpoint, one other area that CSP has just added to our portfolio is termed two-factor authentication. What that means is typically a password is a one-way direction. I go to a website, I enter a password, and I gain access. Two-factor means it has to be a two-way handshake. Some of you may be familiar with this with your banking software, for example, but there are multiple ways to do it. The easiest, most obvious, let's say I go to a website, or it doesn't have to be a website. It could be your VPN client. It could be just logging onto your PC in the morning. I enter my password. All of a sudden, I have a text me with a passcode just to me that I then enter as well. So again, it's that two-way handshake to say, I give something to them, they give something back to me. Really, I guess a three-way handshake, and then I enter that so they make sure it is me. And that technology is seeing a lot of growth in the industry as well, something I would definitely consider. Email encryption and endpoint encryption, two ways to, unfortunately, we talk about ransomware being bad encryption. I guess encryption can be a good thing. If you have a lot of sensitive information, if you're a healthcare organization, legal, financial, encrypting is always recommended to make sure you are protecting that sensitive information that you may have. Finally, real-time monitoring, not only putting things in place, but watching it real time to make sure there are no anomalies. Also, I just said remote connectivity. What we really mean there is how you're allowing your end users to connect to your network and having more secure methods to do that. Citrix, for example, using a more high-end remote connectivity platform to allow people to get into your network. And I will wrap up with even more advanced solutions that are out there. So I know we discussed a whole lot here. I went through 15 different topics in about I think 7 minutes or so, if I'm looking at my clock correctly. So that's a whole lot of information. Today, the purpose wasn't to go too deep into any one of these, but really just get you thinking about where you stand as an organization. Feel free to reach out to myself. Feel free to reach out to one of my peers. And we are happy to walk through. I think security does have to be on an individual basis. Where are your vulnerabilities? Where do you want to be working? And how can we best help you get there? So I really what I want to do is just sort of set the table on what we're seeing, to hopefully get you thinking a little bit about what you're doing and where you need to improve. So with that said, thank you so much for attending. My contact information is here on the bottom. Feel free to reach out. I hope you found this to be beneficial. Do not hesitate to follow up with any questions you may have about your environment, or also, as I said at the start, feedback on the webinar. What works well? What do you want to see in the future? How can we improve?